Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nessie's Dead. We are your hosts, Spencer and Helen.
Hello.
Hello. And I have a true crime case for us today.
Oh, we're going back to true crime now.
It's been a little while.
It has.
Quite a while for true crime. And this is actually going to be a very different type of true crime. Now, this one is actually solved, and as you know, I don't normally go towards the solved cases.
I was about to say solve. That's really not usually your thing.
No.
Mm-mm.
And it's not going to be as it's not a serial killer. It's not some weird, gruesome, crazy, obscene experience. Like, obviously, it's true crime. It's going to involve something brutal and gruesome, but it's not in the likes of what we normally talk about.
Interesting.
What's really interesting about this particular case is that it's not necessarily the first ever true crime case. And what else is different with this case is normally when we do true crime, it usually is like between the 1960s and into I think the 2000s.
Yeah, that
This
sounds about
one
right.
is about 200 years earlier. Now, this case is not necessarily the first ever true crime case. However, it is the first of its kind, and it kind of ends up kicking off this new wave of media coverage in regards to crime cases. The way that the public responded to this particular case was unlike anything before. It kind of gave way to how true crime is consumed and I think socially seen today.
I don't have any idea what you're going to talk about.
Well, that's a good transition then for getting into the case, right?
Yeah, let's go. Let's take a plunge.
Yes. So, we will be discussing the case of the Red Barn murder. So, how we're going to start off with this case is I'm going to present to you a kind of like the iconic piece of the story, which centers around the Red Barn, which is where the title comes from.
Okay.
It takes place in rural Suffolk, England, in 1827. We have Maria Martin and William Corder. Now, Maria was about 26 years old at the time, and how it all begins is she is making her way to the infamous Red Barn on Barnfield Hill, and while she's doing it, she's actually disguised as a man. She is dressed in men's attire, and she has her dark curly hair tucked up into a hat. After our disguised Maria makes her way into the Red Barn, we have about 24, 25-year-old William Corder, who makes his way in as well. After the two are both inside, a gun is fired. Locals in the area hear it, and after that, the two cannot be found.
They found
What?
a body though, right?
Not yet. Well, not yet.
Okay.
We will be finding a body, but not quite yet.
Okay.
But that's kind of this is where everything really starts with the case. Now, let's go into a little bit of the backstory of Maria and William. So, Maria Martin was born July 24th, 1801. She was the daughter of a local mole catcher, who is someone who catches moles. Fun fact. That what?
I said okay.
In case you were wondering what mole catcher meant. And fun fact, that profession actually can be traced all the way back to ancient Rome.
I didn't realize moles were such an issue.
I know that you can make a whole profession on ridding gardens of them.
Wow. Well, I learned something new today.
Yeah, last week we talked a lot about squirrels. This week we will go on a tangent about moles. So she comes from a bit of a lower class family. Being a mole catcher was not bringing in all the money. So she goes on to she ends up being like a maid or some kind of job of servitude for a nearby family, the Corder family. They were a family of middle-class tenant farmers. While she was working for the family, she actually begins a bit of a fling with one of the quarter men named Thomas.
Mm.
Now, because she was considered the help and came from a lower class family, Thomas did not want people knowing about their relationship, so he kept it secret. However, they did end up having a baby together, which Thomas did not acknowledge. He was like, no, like, that's not my son. Like, no, no, no. But a few weeks after the birth, the child did die. However, not long after that, Thomas happened to slip and fall into a pond or river, leading to his death.
Well, I don't feel too bad for him.
No. Now, what's really interesting around this time, only about a year after Thomas slipped and fell in the water, two of his other brothers and his father both died mysteriously.
So everybody's just dying.
Yes. Now, officially, it's considered that two of his brothers and his father died of unknown medical issues, but I do find it really odd that it was right. Like, they all died around the same time, and it was only about a year after Thomas slipped and fell and died. I personally feel like there could have been something a little more to that,
Was
but
she still the help?
she was, yes.
Oh, could have been.
Could have, well, we'll get into some stuff.
Oh, okay.
But after Thomas slipped and fell and died, Maria then starts another relationship, briefly, with Peter Mayhew. And he came from a little bit of a higher class family, and he also wanted their relationship to be kept secret.
She hasn't learned yet?
No, she just keeps getting with these not so great men.
Mm.
Now, Peter and Maria end up having a child named Thomas Henry, and that child does survive.
She named the next child Thomas after she dated a Thomas?
Yes, and there was a lot of confusion in the research because some sources said that this was Thomas's child, which would be, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Junior. Other sources said that this was Peter Mayhew's child. However, the name Thomas, I believe, is coming from her father because her father's name was also Thomas.
So many Thomases in this story.
Yeah, so I believe that's why the son's name was Thomas.
Okay, that would make a little bit more sense.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah.
So, not long after Maria gave birth to little Thomas Henry, the couple broke up. Peter Mayhew did not really acknowledge that he had a child because at the time it was considered illegitimate. But according to the law, he did have to pay child support, so he did that. But beyond that, he was not a part of the child's life.
Well, at least he paid.
Yeah.
I'm kind of shocked that they would even make him do that back then.
I know. And we'll get into a little bit of that as well later on. But I also, for that time, I am surprised.
Yeah.
But shortly after the couple broke up, Maria then begins another new relationship, this time with a man that she was already familiar with. This is William Corder, and he was the last standing male relative from the Corder family that she was working for.
So she went back and dated another person from the same family?
Yes.
Oh my, this girl is just not learning any lessons, is she?
No, I don't think so. But what is interesting is William Corder has just inherited his family's farm because his other two brothers and his father suddenly died, and a year before, his other brother Thomas died. So now it's all Williams.
Mm-hmm.
I find that a little weird.
Very suspicious.
So the new couple, Maria and William, started off secret as well. Same kind of issue. She was lower class. She was considered the help, and he didn't want to ruin his reputation. But it did not stay private for long. So Maria, of course, had hopes that he was going to be a little bit of a better guy than the previous ones.
And was he?
No. So he actually did not. He did not have a very good reputation in town. The locals referred to him as Foxy because he was considered very untrustworthy. They said that he was a liar, and there were multiple times that he was caught for forgery and fraud.
She knows how to pick them, doesn't she?
Yes. In terms of the fraud, his father before he died, his father would pay off the authorities so that he didn't actually get in any official trouble. So he's also just that kind of like typical privileged,
Yeah.
whatever. I can't think of the term, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. He just
He
kind of
was,
gets away with whatever because he's rich.
yes. And I
Daddy
feel
will
like,
pay it off.
exactly. But Daddy's dead, and now you have his farm.
Mm.
So it is not before long that Maria is again pregnant, and she is like totally in love with William. They're expecting the baby. However, the baby died a few weeks after birth. So so she lost two. She has one son that survived, but did lose the other two.
Babies died like a lot back then. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
That was very common in the 1800s. And I think this was the early 1800s. This is 1827 at the time. I feel like once we get into the Victorian era, which starts a little bit after this, everything just got like way worse
Oh,
for
yeah, it
children
did.
and childbirth. And there are other periods in history where it was horrible to be alive at all.
Yeah.
Specifically a child and specifically a newborn. And that was why, fun little history, that was why a lot of women would have like a ton of children because she would hope that 2 or 3 would survive out of the like 8.
Exactly.
But Maria was really concerned that William was about to leave her after they lost the baby, but he stuck around. So she just has all these high hopes for him. She's totally in love. She's like, wow, he's a good guy. I can trust him. He's going to stick around. And then William promises to marry her. So she's like, oh my gosh, yes, of course. Like, he's going to follow through. He wants to get married. She already had another kid from another relationship, and William didn't care.
I'm just wondering what the catch is. Like,
Oh, yeah. Well, right around the time that they're planning to get married, William tells Maria that the local constable is looking for her because he's going to arrest her. The reason for the supposed arrest was because she had multiple children, all of which out of wedlock, which at the time was illegal. That was a punishable offense, and she really could have been arrested for that.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. But not the guy, just the woman.
No, of course not.
Yeah,
He would not have been arrested. Interestingly enough, the man would have been required to pay child support. However, if the circumstances were there, the woman would be arrested. And she not only had given birth to 3 children out of wedlock, yes, only one survived, but all 3 of them came from 3 different men. So to the town, she doesn't, I don't think she had like the best reputation at that point.
No.
So it could have been a very real thing that a constable was coming to arrest her. But we are not totally sure if it was true because remember, William was considered to be untrustworthy.
Yeah, a liar.
And he was nicknamed Foxy. So this, of course, gets Maria all freaked out, and she's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I don't want to go to jail. So William comes up with a plan. On May 18th, 1827, William
my
is
birthday.
Oh, yeah.
It's my birthday.
Happy birthday, 170 years early.
Yep.
So on your birthday, 1827, while at Maria's family home, William explains to Maria and her stepmother Anne what they're going to do. Now, Maria's stepmother Anne was around the same age as her stepdaughter. Some reports said that she was only a year older. Other reports said that she was 10 years older, but either way, she was around the same age as Maria. So William is telling Maria and her stepmother Anne that they need to elope and run away to evade this situation with the constable. He tells Maria to meet him at the Red Barn on Barnfield Hill. After that, they will then flee, heading to Ipswich, where they will wed. And then after that, they will make it to London and start a new life together.
What about the farm?
I don't know. I kept wondering that too. I was like, well, do you just abandon the farm? Which makes me think that there could have been a little bit of like a financial thing around it, perhaps. Because he
Maybe.
already had some, I don't know. This part I'm just kind of like theorizing. He was known to commit fraud and forgery and all this stuff with like financial. He was a financial criminal already. So I was wondering if there maybe was some kind of thing with like selling the farm or abandoning the farm or some kind of trick he had up his sleeve in regards to that. But I'm not sure.
Maybe he didn't have as much money as he proclaimed he did.
Oh, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, back to the plan. He also tells Maria that while heading to the barn, she needs a disguise, and he suggests that she arrives disguised as a man. And he tells her this because in case the constable arrives before they're able to flee, the disguise would throw him off and he wouldn't realize that this man entering the barn was actually Maria, the woman he's trying to arrest. So Maria and her stepmother Anne are like, oh, perfect. That's so smart, William. Yeah, perfect. That's the plan. So they do act out this plan, at least part of it anyway. Just a quick little refresher, the two make their way into the barn, and after they're both inside, a gun is fired. After the gun is fired, the couple is nowhere to be found. Maria's family assumes that, I don't think they realized perhaps that the gunshot came from the barn. They totally assumed that everything was going according to plan, the couple was on the way to Ipswich, and then they were going to head to London and be totally married and everything would be fine.
Yeah. Well?
However, they never hear or see from Maria again.
Oh, no letters, nothing.
At least not physically.
Mm.
So William, actually, a few weeks after making it to London, William returns to town. I'm not sure if he ran into the Martins, Maria's family, or if he actually went to visit them, but they were like, well, why didn't Maria come back with you? And he was like, oh, she wasn't ready. She was a little anxious still about the whole situation with the constable. They're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Then a few weeks later, he comes back and visits again, still without Maria. And he had some other, she was sick or something. There was always an excuse as to why she didn't return home.
Yeah.
They, of course, thought this was a little odd, but tried not to overthink it. And I think Maria's father, being a lower class family, I think they were just happy that their daughter married up. And I think just had these high hopes for her, and they didn't want to assume the worst.
They were still trying to be excited and happy for her opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, eventually, he stops visiting town and starts sending letters to the Martin family. In these letters, he was saying how Maria was so happy and she just loves being a married woman in London. I don't know if at any point he pretended to be Maria, but if he did, the family knew, and they every time would write back and say, where's Maria? Why isn't she writing us? And, this is getting kind of weird. And again, he always had some kind of excuse. And eventually the letters stop. There's no contact. And the family has no way of reaching out to Maria. Again, they're lower class. They don't have the money to go out to London to check on things. They don't have the money or the resources to send someone over there. So they kind of just have to sit by and hope that everything was okay.
Oh, that's so sad.
I know. I feel like it's definitely times like this that I can't imagine, like, we have cell phones now and like you can stalk someone and see if they're online on Instagram or Facebook Messenger, if they're posting on any social media, Snapchat. There are so many ways that you could figure something out nowadays, but back then it was like horseback, letter.
Yeah.
There you go. That's it.
I don't think we can go back.
What do you mean?
Like, I think if anything was to happen, it would be very difficult for us to be like that. I think we'd feel very isolated.
We're I don't think we're smart enough or have the I don't think I don't think our society has the capacity to return to that
No,
level of communication, sadly. Maybe one
no.
day, but I don't think that it would be easy. Well, anyway, so back to the Red Barn murder. Around the time that the letters stopped coming in, Maria's stepmother, Anne, was mentioning that she had a bad feeling about the whole situation. And she brought up that she had a bad feeling about William ever since the very beginning, but she kind of probably was like, oh, he has not the best reputation in town for forgery and whatnot, but I'm happy for my stepdaughter.
Yeah, you kind
And
of
then,
take what you can get when you're lower class marrying up and, trying to make it where your family's not always going to be lower class.
yes,
He may not be the best, but there was
but he's
hope,
not poor.
right?
Now, around the time, like I said, that the letters stopped, she started to figure out that this wasn't just a bad feeling, like, I don't know if I like him, but it was like an actual bad feeling. She suddenly starts to have these reoccurring dreams featuring Maria.
Oh, no.
And this actually becomes a very pivotal part of the case. This is part of why this case ends up becoming so popular in the media the way that it did.
Is Maria visiting her in her dreams?
She was.
Oh,
So almost every night, according to Anne, she would dream of Maria appearing before her, and Maria would then lead her out of the house and down through the country to that red barn where she was last known to be. And
she's gonna like point her in the direction of where she's at, isn't she?
yes, exactly.
Oh,
So
no.
at first she just thought this was a weird dream, but it kept happening and kept happening. And eventually she was like, okay, maybe it's not just some weird dream. Maybe it's not my subconscious being worried. Maybe Maria is actually trying to tell me something. So the two eventually go out to the barn to investigate on April 19th, 1828. This was about a year after Maria had last been seen. They go in with a mole poker, some kind of mole catcher equipment.
Was this barn like on his property? Like his use?
No, it was actually on the Corder's property.
Okay.
So William would have probably been relatively familiar with it.
Mm.
So Anne and her husband are quite literally poking around. They eventually come across the buried body of Maria Martin.
Mm.
She was loosely wrapped in a sack with some remnants of her dark curly hair still on her head. So they were definitely able to be like, okay, that's her. Around her neck was a tightly tied green handkerchief that belonged to guess who?
To William.
To William, exactly.
Shocker.
Now, her cause of death could not actually be determined. However, she had been shot in the head with a pistol, strangled, and she had been stabbed in the eye. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Maybe he was trying to kill her and she wouldn't die and then he used the gun. Maybe he wasn't trying to use the gun because it was going to make a bunch of noise, but then at the end he was like, I have no choice.
Oh, perhaps. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. She was a fighter.
Yes. Now, some people suggest that perhaps the stab wound to the eye was not actually from William himself, but from her father after she had already been dead. When he
Oh.
poked with the poker, that could have been how they stumbled on the body, but we don't know.
Well, that would make sense too. Maybe he was just trying to strangle her and she was throwing up so much of a fight. He just,
Shot her.
got
Yeah.
tired of it.
So while the cause of death was kind of confusing, figuring out who did it was not.
Mm-mm.
Everything pointed back to William Corder, of course. And it turns out that he was pretty easy to find. He was really living in London, like according to his plan, and that is where they catch him. Upon searching his home in London, they find 2 pistols, a passport from the French ambassador, which suggests that he was probably going to flee the country. And, get this, they even found a letter from a friend of his notifying him that they had just discovered Maria's body.
Oh, so he had even told somebody about it.
Yes. And if I was a killer and you knew and you sent me a letter saying, oh, they might catch you, I would take that passport and get out of the country and I would get to France right away.
And
And I would
destroy
go,
the letter.
I would get rid of that letter.
Yeah. Throw it in the
Meanwhile,
fire.
I mean, if you killed someone, well, first of all, don't kill anyone. Second of all, turn yourself in.
Yeah, let's not
But,
kill anybody.
we're not saying
But
to
if it
evade
was,
the police, but it's just crazy.
yeah, but if it was you or me, those are the steps we should take.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. But you know what he was actually doing after he got this letter about Marie's body being discovered and everything? He was out to breakfast. That's where they caught him.
He was just chilling, eating some food.
Yeah, they arrested him at the breakfast table in front of his new wife, I might add, who he
Oh,
had recently met after he put an ad in the paper, like a Lonely Hearts ad.
wow. Poor woman.
I know. Now, I just thought it was fun to note what he wrote in his ad. He was looking for a female of respectability.
Oh, so he didn't want no hoe.
No. So, at the time, the couple had also been running an all-girls boarding school in London. When he was arrested, he claimed that he had no idea who Maria Martin was. However, of course, nobody was buying that. There was
Mm-mm.
substantial evidence, like
There's
so much evidence.
there's too many witnesses.
Yeah, and even more come forward later. So once the press got a hold of this case, this obviously was being ran in the paper instantly. It became a huge sensation. Like everybody was talking about it. So when it came to his trial, this was huge. This was a media frenzy. The public was just flooding in. Everybody was trying to get the latest information, see as much of the trial as they could. I mean, this was being reported, like I said, in a way no other case really was reported before.
Much more like a modern day trial of
Yes.
something that goes crazy like that.
Yes. For the time, this was like our Menendez brothers and Gabby Petito.
Oh.
Or like OJ in the 90s, or JonBenet Ramsey.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the likes of that, with the kind of insane media coverage. Everyone's talking about it.
It was all over the front page of the newspaper.
It was. And we'll get more into that in a moment. But William Corder's trial began August 7th, 1828. He was taken to Shire Hall at Bury St. Edmunds. And during the trial, he was pleading not guilty the entire time.
Shocker.
Yeah, and that it did not work.
Mm-mm.
At one point, he actually claimed that Maria had committed suicide while they were in the barn together. He described it as she grabbed the pistol from him and shot herself in the head. So he ran off because he was nervous that he would be wrongfully arrested for her murder, even though she committed suicide. So he thought no one would believe him anyway, so he decided to flee. And like what any innocent person would do, they then don't tell anyone about the suicide, wrap the body and bury it up in the barn, flee the country, and pretend that the victim is still alive and well while writing the family of the victim.
That's what you always do when there's a suicide, right?
Right?
Right. It makes total sense. I mean.
So nobody was buying this.
Yeah,
at
no.
all.
What about the strangulation? How is he playing that off? Did she try to choke herself out before she did that?
That was the initial attempt.
Wow.
Well, nobody was buying that. The prosecution was not, the judge, whatever, the public. And also to note, usually when you have someone like William, who becomes kind of a sensationalized, almost character, that's kind of what happened with this case, was that he became kind of this character, like this crazed killer that everyone was sort of drawn to. However, he did not have the sympathizers like we have with modern day killers who get caught. You know how like
the women that go after him and they're like, ugh, I can change him.
Yeah, like Richard Ramirez gets arrested and he has like hordes of fan mail coming in from women who want to marry him.
And a new girlfriend on the side.
Yeah, so William did not have that. Everyone was against him. They were just fascinated by it. So also during the trial, Maria's younger brother actually comes forward and he tells the court that when he saw William heading into the Red Barn, he noticed that he was carrying a loaded pistol with him.
He just now came out with this information.
Yeah, I thought that was weird because at first it was like, so no one saw them go into the barn, and if they did, they just ignored the gunshot.
Yeah.
But either way, this was used against William, of course, and it was considered evidence.
Well, as it should be. As it should
Yeah,
be.
and courts operated a little bit differently in the 1820s compared to now.
Oh, I'm sure.
Something else that actually held up in court as evidence was Maria's ghost and Anne's dreams.
That would never fly nowadays. Well, I don't know. There was that one time, that big court case where that guy tried to say he was possessed. I don't think that worked out well for him, though.
Yeah, that wasn't used as real evidence, though, was it?
I think it was. I think it was like the first time something like that was allowed to be.
Oh, I'm
But
actually not familiar with it. Like, I know of it, so maybe you should cover that soon.
maybe I'm just getting that from a Conjuring movie, so don't quote me on that.
Well, I do know there was a case that did involve someone who claimed to have been possessed, and that's why they acted the way they did. I just don't know the details of it.
Same. That's why I'm kind of wondering if I'm getting it mixed up with a movie or a documentary. Too many different horror and true crime things that I watch. Too many.
Yeah,
They're all
which,
getting entangled.
if you want to hear us talk about that, check out last week's episode, The Psychology of Horror.
That was a banger.
It was.
It
A
was.
little bit of audio issue, but it was good information.
It was.
Anyway, back to the trial. So I found that very interesting that these dreams were actually used as real evidence and Anne actually testified. But I think it's pretty cool that a dream featuring a supposed ghost is considered legitimate evidence. And the court was like, yep, this checks out. And they literally use it against William.
Times were different back then.
Very.
Yeah.
Now, the prosecution, while we don't ever really figure out the real motive that he had as to why he murdered Maria, but the prosecution believed that he was concerned that Maria was going to blackmail him for some kind of financial stuff that he was doing, like the forgery and fraud and whatnot.
I don't believe that because she was excited and happy to get married and move away and...
I agree. I don't think that's why. Now, a lot of people do suggest that perhaps she was going to be, I mean, like, he just got this farm inherited to him essentially, and again, under what I consider to be kind of unusual circumstances, but she would have been getting part of it too. You know, all of a sudden she's becoming part of the whole family as well, and I don't think he wanted to share everything with her. All of a sudden he's kind of tied down. I think he just kind of saw Maria as something he needed to get rid of.
Oh, what about the new wife? Wouldn't he have to share everything with her?
I guess, I don't know. But they're running a girls' school after he, I think, abandoned the farm. I don't know, it's very odd.
Like I said before, maybe he didn't have as much money as he proclaimed that he had. Maybe he was actually bankrupt, or maybe the farm was in debt and he was like, oh, I got to get out of here and I can't take you with me. You're too much. I can't take care of two people and a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, whatever it was, we never figure out an actual motive.
He never comes clean, does he?
He does confess, but he doesn't ever explain why.
Coward.
So 3 days after the trial, he does eventually confess after sitting in jail for a little while, and it wasn't until multiple people persuaded him to confess, including a discussion with a priest who was like, if you don't confess, you'll go to hell. And that kind of scared him, and he does eventually confess. He was actually charged with 10 counts of murder.
Wow.
Yeah. This is in reference to the 10 different ways they believed that he could have killed her. So they used all 10 possibilities against him to try him.
That's crazy. They were really going to make an example out of him.
Yeah, people hated him, regardless of how much of a weird killer celebrity pedestal he was being put on. They wanted to see him go down.
Mm.
So he was sentenced to a public execution by hanging, followed by which those are always grand events back in the day.
That was like your television show.
That was it literally was a family event. Like you took the kids and wife to see that.
That's so wild. Can you imagine if that was how it took place today? Like everyone went down to the town square.
Should we bring that back?
Maybe some people would
Maybe
stop
that would help.
Right?
For serious crimes, anyway. But after the public execution, he was sentenced to also be publicly dissected. Do you know about public dissection?
No, but this sounds gruesome.
So this was a very common practice for criminals. After the execution, which also was public, they would dissect them in front of whoever attended. And this was kind of used as a humiliation tactic to the corpse.
Would they do it in a medical kind of setting, or would they just like cut them open right there on the rope?
I believe it was always in a medical type of setting. I know it was performed by a surgeon.
Oh, okay. Then it was.
I'm not familiar with other situations, but I know for this one particularly, it was medical.
Okay. It's not as bad as I thought, because when you first said that, I just pictured them just slicing him open like a fish while he was hanging there.
Well, it gets a little weirder.
Okay.
So when he was at the gallows on August 11th, 1828, I guess they had a hard time hanging him. So the executioner actually had to use his own weight on William to help with the hanging. He did not die instantly. And that's something really weird about hangings and I find really creepy. Normally you don't die right away. You kind of hang there dying, suffering, and aware of what's happening.
Yeah, it's not like the movies when they're just like plunk.
No, not at all. Mm-hmm. So he hung there for about 10 minutes, like flailing and kicking until he was officially dead.
That's
and then
horrific.
Pulled down for his dissection.
I can't imagine going out like that.
No, awful. With tons of people watching. And for him specifically, like I said, this whole case was huge. The trial was huge and had tons and tons of people in attendance and tons of people outside the courthouse as well. And his public execution was no different. He actually had up to 10,000 people in attendance for that.
Wow, that's insane for that time period.
I know.
I wonder if they were all like cheering as he was flaring around like that.
Probably, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not 100% sure that 10,000 is an accurate number because another journalist at the time reported there were 7,000, which is also a lot of people.
It's close enough. It's more than like 100 or 200. We're up there in the thousands regardless.
Yes. One journalist even said that it was 20,000. So, but 10,000 is the one that scholars typically agree on for the most part.
Yeah, that's right in the middle. We'll say it was 10.
Yeah.
I doubt they did like a full head count.
No, yeah. But it is kind of crazy that there was so much excitement around it and such a turnout. Referring back to his trial, people were like flocking to this area. The hotels nearby were to full capacity with tourists who were there specifically because of this case. And people were booking these hotel rooms a month in advance. You actually had to buy a ticket to attend the trial.
I bet they were like selling all sorts of stuff on the streets in front of it. Like,
oh, they were.
Yeah, I could imagine it pretty much being almost like a fair, a big event with like food and, people trying to sell their goods. Because if you've got that many tourists, you're going to want to get out there and make some money at this event.
Yeah. And they also had merchandise.
Oh my gosh, they had merchandise?
Yes. So this is the first of its kind. It is unlike any other case, like I kept saying. And I do think that there's this kind of weird, insensitive quality that comes along with it. You know, a lot of people argue that true crime nowadays is considered trash culture, that it's insensitive,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, it's kind of a controversial topic, which we could we could cover the psychology of true crime all we want, but we kind of just touched on some of that last week. Maybe
Yeah.
an upcoming episode will be that. But
It doesn't seem like we go that extreme anymore, though. I don't see people outside the courtroom like selling screen T-shirts of like, sure,
oh no.
you know.
No, but we do see that, of course, happening. Like, you told me when we did the Black Dahlia episode, you told me about seeing people who had tattoos of her, but it
Oh
wasn't
yeah,
of her when she was alive, it was of her corpse.
yeah. That was pretty
Or,
disturbing.
yeah, I've seen t-shirts that featured her corpse, or like, well, I guess we've kind of done it. Not with Black Dahlia, but I gave you for your birthday a Charles Manson pin.
Oh yeah, you did. And I
Yeah.
lost that hat, and I called the bar the next day, and they were like, "The one with the Charlie's Angel pin." I was like, "That's me."
Not that we support Charles Manson or anything on this show, but anyway,
It was vintage.
it was. It was from like the 80s.
It's vintage.
Anyway, so this was kicking off this new wave of media coverage when it came to crime. And the people, the very real people who were part of this case, end up becoming, like I also kind of mentioned before, they became like characters. There was this sort of novelty to them. There was this like fantasy that was kind of brought into everything.
So they all became famous.
Yes, I mean, particularly William. He was the one that everything centered around. Sadly, Maria, the victim, was kind of forgotten. I think we see this a lot with a lot of modern true crime coverage, that it kind of sensationalizes the brutal murder and the killer and forgets about the victim, which is why, like on this show, we address the victim, give backstory, and try to make it more so about
Yeah, we give a lot
that.
more details.
Yeah. Now, in regards to this case, William Corder was kind of being portrayed as not just someone from a middle-class farmer family who killed his bride-to-be and then fled. He was being portrayed as this, like, wild, evil killer, which, yes, that is what he was, but they were portraying him like the way that we see, like, Richard Ramirez or Jeffrey Dahmer. They even were suggesting that after he murdered Maria, he was trying to murder her son, Thomas Henry, with a poisoned fig, which was not, I don't believe that was true. That was just something fabricated for the media.
That people made up along the way. Yeah.
And, of course, the fact that Maria's supposed ghost was involved and occurring dreams featuring the ghost, that really helped just sell the story. That was kind of like the headline, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty wild detail. It definitely gives the case a little bit more of a fantasy feel as well.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in regards to some of the fascination the public had with this case, tourists were actually running to the English countryside to get a look at that infamous Red Barn over on Barnfield Hill where the murder occurred. They would stand outside and go inside, and they would kind of like act out the murder together, and it was crazy. They were obsessed with this Red Barn, so much so that they were actually taking souvenirs by picking off pieces of it to keep and I believe sell off as well.
Poor Maria, whose ghost is probably in there like, are you freaking kidding me right now?
Oh, I know. They were doing that to the barn up until the 1840s, when the barn actually ended up burning down in 1843.
I bet it was Maria.
Oh yeah, she was like, stop stealing pieces of my barn.
I'm surprised there was anything left of the barn by that point if everyone's trying to take a little chunk.
I know, I was like, they must have been taking like really small. At first it was, I think, you know, like maybe there was a pitchfork and like farming instruments inside the barn. They were probably taking hay, rocks, and pebbles and stuff because it was a dirt floor.
Yeah.
And then they resorted to taking pieces of the structure itself.
They just emptied it out.
Yeah, there was not much left by the time it ended up burning down.
That's wild. I wonder if any of these artifacts are still around.
There, yes,
Oh.
there's one in particular that I'm excited to tell you about that we have not yet gotten to. Um,
Okay.
it's not one that was used as a souvenir, but is a part of it's more of like morbid history.
Okay. I'll let you get to it then.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There were also, at the time, little figurines of William and Maria and little models of the barn that were being made. I mean, that to me is really weirdly insensitive. I think collecting pieces of the murder scene as souvenirs is insensitive enough, but then to make little models?
This is wild. I don't really feel like we even do anything to this extent now.
No, not at all.
Well, people still go to like the Amityville house, even though that's not a true story. People believe it
But the
is.
murder was,
Yeah.
not the
But
ghosts.
not the ghost. People still go there and try to have picnics on
Hmm.
the lawn and things like that.
Well, I'm sure there are some ghosts there, but I don't think that the ghost story we know is
No,
real. No.
it's not.
But
We could cover that.
you and I would have a picnic at the Amityville house.
Yeah.
So
Let's not try to downplay it. Yeah, we would.
we're weird, but we're not weird. Like we're not going to like glorify the murder or the
Yeah.
killer
We don't
or
collect serial killer action figures.
no, and we're not going to collect pieces of the Amityville house or anything like that for souvenir. Well, you did.
I was sitting here in silence, like,
Maybe cut that. Maybe me calling you out we should cut.
yeah, not my murder house picture frames. Don't come for me.
But we have yet to visit the Amityville house, so
Maybe one day.
So, along with that, there were also peep shows that would feature artist renditions of the murder and the ghostly dreams. So, people were running to these traveling shows to look and see in the peep show the murder itself.
Much like
Now,
they didn't make a movie, they just did like a traveling theater of it.
oh no, there are movies and plays which
Oh
came
my
out at the
gosh.
time. Well, they didn't have movies, but plays, which we'll get into shortly. But alongside with the souvenirs and whatnot, this part's a little sadder and kind of touches back into Maria having been forgotten. So people that were obsessed with the case were chipping away parts of,
Her tombstone.
yes, they were chipping away parts of her
Oh,
tombstone and collecting it, so much so that now her tombstone cannot be found. Like we know where she's buried, we just don't know where she's buried.
that's so sad.
I do believe they ended up putting up a plaque nearby or a flag or something to signify the vicinity she's in, but her actual tombstone is now gone. I think that the town should come together and give her a new one.
Yeah, they can look and see where bodies are. We have the technology now.
Yeah.
Oh, they definitely should. That's just horrible.
Mm-hmm. And like we mentioned, there were theatrical adaptations of this happening. So literally less than a month after Maria's body was discovered in the barn, there was a play about it. It took like 2 weeks. It broke in the media, caught on like crazy, and suddenly we have a theatrical adaptation. There was play after play after play coming out about this case.
Very similar to the movie Scream. The
Yes, I was
Gainesville
thinking.
Ripper.
When I was doing the research, I was like, that's literally like Scream because Gainesville Ripper was what, 95
Yeah, they
or
came out
90,
with that.
and Scream was 96.
Maybe the Gainesville Ripper was a little earlier. I can't remember right off the top of my head. But it wasn't, but like a couple years after that.
I feel like it was about a year before Scream went into production, so maybe like a 2-year gap
Mm-hmm.
officially, if I remember correctly.
It's wild.
But very similar, yes. So, a part of the way that this case was blowing up and spreading the way that it was through the use of ballad singers. Now, these were singers who traveled around to where public executions and where cases were being reported, like just kind of the bulk of where a certain crime case was happening. They would go to sing about it, which I know sounds really odd, but
It
what they would
does.
do, they would write a ballad, like a little short kind of summary, like a little story about the case, maybe a break in the case or what was happening in the trial. And they would sell copies of it to the people nearby, like at people who attended the trial or the execution or were outside the courthouse waiting for the information to come out. They would sell copies of the little story and they would sing it out loud to the public. This way, it wasn't just the people who could afford to buy the ballad, and it wasn't just the people who could read. Everyone was hearing the song. Everyone was hearing the story be reported this way.
That is very odd. I can't really imagine that.
I think it's kind of like a town crier,
Yeah.
but through music and through it wasn't like, hear ye, so-and-so did this. It was like a short story that was sung. And what would happen typically is people would get it stuck in their head and then keep singing it. And then it would spread to the next town, and it was just, I guess, how things got spread at the time.
I bet by the time it got to that last town, it was all messed up, though.
Oh, I'm sure, like telephone, especially with the tunes and lyrics kind of changing a little here and there. I'm sure it was like a game of telephone.
Oh, yeah.
So not only were the ballads helping to spread the story, but they were also helping to kind of unintentionally create the sense of the characterization to this case. And this is what brought William to being seen as a celebrity killer.
He was like the first, or
kind of. I mean, it's not to say we haven't had killers or famous killers, but
yeah,
it was reported and seen in such a different way.
It was over the top.
Yeah, and especially because in the past before, everyone was a murderer.
Yeah. Did we have Jack the Ripper, or is he after this?
I think he was a little bit after. I think he was Victorian. Okay. I'm not sure. I'm sure someone's gonna
come at us. It's fine.
Yeah, but
leave that comment.
Yeah, come with it.
Come on.
So, like I said, William's execution drew in quite the interest, and afterwards he was publicly dissected. His body was actually taken to the Shire Hall, where a surgeon performed the dissection. The skin was removed, leaving his organs and all of his insides on display for people to come and see for a solid day. It was just left there to be looked at.
Surprised they weren't taking souvenirs of that.
I know. Well, they did.
Oh my gosh.
The public did not.
Oh.
I don't think I think maybe he was in a case or something. Otherwise, they probably would have been because of how crazy this case was. But the piece that they did take was surgical. Part of his skin was taken off of his body, and his skin was then used to bind a book about this exact case.
This is wild. They really went all out.
I know. So there's a book about him and this murder, and it's bound in the murderer's flesh. And it's on display at Moysey's Hall Museum in England. So I think we need a Nessie's Dead field trip to this museum.
That's so crazy. I can't imagine like a story written about something horrific that you did and then it's bound in your skin.
I know. It's like, why?
Do we need that?
I mean, it's fascinating.
It is. I
think it was maybe part of the humiliation to the corpse.
Maybe.
But it doesn't stop there. So this next part's crazy. To me, this part's crazier.
This is crazier. Okay. All right.
So after being on display, they then took his body to a nearby hospital where they hooked it up to a battery and then administered electric shocks to it in an attempt to reanimate the corpse.
I'm just sitting here with my mouth, my jaw is just dropped. Who had that idea? Why?
I don't know. I don't know if this, I mean, at this time we're starting to get towards the Victorian era, which had a huge focus of death and just the macabre in general, which we kind of touch on in our Make Christmas Dark Again episode. So I don't know if maybe there was some strange fascination. This is not, I don't know exactly when Frankenstein came out, but this, I think, is not far from when it came out. And so maybe this is just what people liked. I don't know.
It's like they just didn't want it to stop, and they were just like, now what do we do? Well, we can just hook him up to some electricity and see what happens. It's like they didn't
Yeah.
want the thrill to end.
Yeah. They didn't want the case to end. They were like, let's execute him again.
Let's do it again.
Let's bring him back and bring him back to the gallows. So, for anyone who's wondering, no, it did not work. He did not come back to life. We have
Oh.
yet to have a successful Frankenstein experiment.
Right?
You're right. Maybe. There's still hope.
There's hope.
But it wasn't done there. So, after that, his skull was separated from the skeleton and was sent off to be studied. What they were doing was they were studying parts of the skull to see developmental stuff, and they believed that certain shapes within the head represented certain abilities of being a good person versus not a good person.
Yeah, like certain knots and dips and
Yes.
like, yeah, the bone structure.
And exactly. And I don't think this stands much in medical science still to this day.
No.
But one part of his head that was supposed to be in regards to like human empathy and like something that makes you a good person was not fully developed, according to them. It's interesting to note.
That is.
So then after that, his skeleton is given to a medical school where it was used for over 100 years. Then his skeleton was taken to the Royal College of Surgeons Museum, and then he was officially cremated in 2004.
It took them that long to finally cremate him?
Almost 200 years.
Oh my gosh. I mean, everybody was hanging on to this guy.
I know. So, also, continuing into the 20th century and 21st century, the theatrical adaptations continued, and in the 1900s, there were a total of 5 movies made about this case, along with more plays and more books. The rest of these books were not bound in human flesh, though.
Well, so. I'd hope not. They just had some leftover, and they were like, yeah, just put a little patch on the spine of the book. It's fine.
But that is all I have for you in terms of what is considered the case that gave us true crime the way it is done today.
Man, I had no clue. I would have never guessed that type of case existed, and it was so crazy.
I know, and it's not that. I mean, I think people were drawn to it because it had this love affair with a woman in disguise, and they were going to elope. She was kind of on the run from the law, and then she was murdered in a barn. Then her ghost tells a family member where to find her body, and that's what brings the killer to justice. But it's just so odd that it grew so much attention.
Yeah, it's not the actual case that's so bizarre. It's everything that surrounded it afterward.
Yeah, the response and the aftermath. Now, speaking of that, I have some questions for you.
Oh, question time. Q&A.
So, first, I want to know, do you think William Corder killed not only Maria Martin, but do you think that he also had something to do with his 2 brothers and his father all dying mysteriously at the same time, along with potentially his other brother Thomas having an accident falling into a body of water?
I do. I don't know, maybe Thomas not so much. Maybe he could have just slipped and bumped his head. But it's very odd that everyone died and he ends up with all the money and the farm. And he's already known as, Foxy. And then it just seemed like it was so easy for him to just kill Maria and leave. Instead of, he could have just left.
Right.
He could have just, they weren't married yet, so she wouldn't have had any claim on the farm or anything like that. They didn't have any kids together that were alive.
I know, he had no reason to murder her that we know of. I mean, not that, and there's never reason to murder someone.
Yeah, no motive.
Yeah, don't murder, but it doesn't totally make sense. Which makes me think something might be missing. I wonder if perhaps she knew more about the death of the other Corder men, and he was like, oh, she might be onto me.
Maybe.
And maybe that was it.
It just seems like killing didn't seem quite like it wasn't his first time, is kind of how it feels.
It all happened within a year.
Yeah, and it was so premeditated too, like dress up like this so nobody recognizes you.
He knew exactly what he was doing with that.
Yeah, he did.
Now, my next question is in regards to the stepmother, Anne. And I know what you're going to say. Do you believe that she was really visited by Maria's ghost?
Yes, I do. Of course I do.
Like, duh.
Duh.
And these were not these weren't
I,
just dreams, they were visions, right?
yeah, I think that your loved ones that pass over can definitely come and visit you in your dreams.
I do too.
Yeah. Now, could we use it in a court of law? No, but I mean, I think most people, if you were to say something like that, there's a lot of people that would be like, okay. But I think for people
Okay.
like you and me, we're definitely like, oh, yep,
We get it.
100%. Yep.
Now, in regards to that, with Maria's ghost, I have one more piece of information with a follow-up question.
Ooh, okay.
So perhaps this has been suggested. Perhaps Anne was actually having an affair with William as well. So the stepmother, Anne, remember she was around the same age as Maria.
Yeah.
And remember, she was also present when William came up with the plan.
When he told her the
Maria
plan.
and Anne about the plan. Why did he bring it up with the stepmother? So if Anne was aware of it, she could have been aware of the murder as well. Perhaps the reason that William kept coming back to visit after he made his getaway to London, which he had no real reason to keep coming back that we know of.
It's because he was going to go see Anne.
Because he was visiting his other lady, Anne. And perhaps Anne found out that while he was in London, William married another woman. Because at the time that the letters stopped coming to the Martin household, when he stopped having communication with essentially Anne, that was when she said she's having dreams about Maria's ghost telling her about a body in the barn. It was right then when he stopped reaching out that she finds the body and then uses it to testify against him and bringing him down.
That makes sense too, because she can't go and be like, I know where her body is. She's got to think of a way. How can I say where the body is without also throwing myself under the bus that I knew this had taken place?
So was Anne involved and using the supposed dream and Maria's ghost to bring him down, or was it really a vision?
Wouldn't he have thrown her under the bus during court, though?
I don't know. People hated him. Even if he did, people would have been like, "No, you're coming for her too."
Probably. I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, the evidence is there. It makes sense. But as somebody that also believes that that can happen, maybe your guilty conscience was also playing a part into having these dreams.
Yeah, maybe.
It could have been a combination of both. Maybe it wasn't so much a ghost. Maybe she was just having nightmares about Maria because she knew the truth.
I think she knew.
I mean, it sounds very plausible that she could have.
Well, those were all the questions I had. Let us know in the comments what you guys think.
Yes. Leave us a comment. We don't get too many. We would like more.
And subscribe. Please subscribe.
Yeah, hit that subscribe and like button.
Maybe send us envelopes of cash, too.
We do accept that.
Yeah, just throwing that out there. But yeah, that's all we have for you right now.
Well, that was a really good one. It was very interesting. I mean, like you said before, there's not a whole lot to the case. It's everything that is around the case that really makes it just this wild, crazy circumstance. Good one.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if I wanted to cover it. I was like, it might not land and it might be a little bit too short and people might be like, why is he talking about this? And as I kept doing it, I was like, no, I think I want to cover this. And I think it worked out.
Well, thank you so much, sir, I guess.
We will say goodnight.
And pleasant nightmares.
Bye.
Bye.